I have a lot of questions for the MCU, for Kevin Feige, for the creative forces driving that train. But here's my biggest one. How is James Gunn so much better at this than almost any other key creative working within that universe? 3 times in the MCU and now twice in the DCU, he's done what I think people have forgotten the MCU is capable of: made us believe in movies.
The movies.
He's blown us away, as he so often does, among a series of films that feel crafted by committee and filled in with teasers to get you to just consume more product. It is refreshing as all hell to get a truly human story, to get a story that feels meticulously crafted by someone who cares about what is going to make you feel something in the moment, as opposed to using his film as a cheap excitement driver for a separate film. There's been this joke online that doing a Marvel movie has become somewhat equivalent to filmmaker jury duty, but James Gunn has capitalized on the growing stagnancy of the MCU to not only make its best post-Endgame film, but stand so far above the rest of the crowd that he has proven himself to be one of the most exciting creatives of the modern blockbuster era. He was able to grow and mature as a storyteller working on the Guardians of the Galaxy films, and now is able to take what he's learned from his time in the MCU and depart, moving on to his next chapter, shepherding in a new era for the DCU, and using his status as Marvel's golden boy to make the overall landscape of comic book movies, specifically DC movies, better. Whether or not he achieves that, and whether or not his efforts in the MCU have any lasting effect on the other work being done there, remains to be seen. For my money, though, I think we can trust our emotions and believe in James Gunn to make the most of his second chance, and nothing could instill more confidence in that belief than Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3. This trilogy of films has been about figuring out who you are, how to support yourself, how to find family, and how to become the best version of yourself, how to make better on past mistakes and move forward, how to make the most of a second chance. And a big part of that has been the support system you create. The family you have behind you is always going to have your back, but there will come a point where they each need to grow and focus on themselves apart from one another, to address their past trauma and problems and grow from it so that they may become stronger because of it. The Guardians will always be friends, will always be that family they needed, and will always care and love for each other. But just like with any family, there comes a point in time when you need to venture off on your own and discover who it is you are and what you're capable of as an individual. It's part of the reason why so much of this film plays a bit like a senior year farewell, both in terms of the characters needing to branch out and grow, and also James Gunn being able to exercise complete creative freedom and control without any Feige-mandated overrules, because he's done here. He's going on to run the DCU and move on to the next phase of his life. He's got nothing to lose. What are they gonna do? Fire him again? And honestly, this is true to life. We live in phases, and after so many years, things change and we move on to the next phase. We evolve as people, experience new things, new hardships, and continue to grow from it. An inability to move on from the past emotionally stunts growth and causes people to stagnate as they live in an almost real-life purgatory. We should never forget the past, never forget the people we love or the friends we made along the way. They're a part of us, but we need to understand that change is good too. It presents new challenges and opportunities, and there will be times when everyone can come back together again and reminisce, laugh, bask in the company of friendship. But the separation is what will make those bonds even stronger when everyone is together. James Gunn has embraced the fact that he is A, incredibly sentimental, and B, also a weirdo who likes to explore deep trauma and the ugliest sides of human nature. That's what he has always done so well. He takes really grim subject matter and uses it to tell incredibly soulful human stories. Abuse has always kind of been the undercurrent of most of the Guardians' backstories. They just did a whole movie about Quill's abusive dad, for God's sake, and Gamora and Nebula's strained sisterhood due to their own abusive father. It's kind of a running theme. James cares deeply about how people in positions of power treat the vulnerable, which, side note, is why he's going to write the best Superman movie of all time, folks. But it's also why Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3 is handily the best post-Endgame MCU film, and dare I say, the greatest MCU film ever made. And if you want to create something this great, you need to stay sharp, and there's no better way to do that than with this video's sponsor, Brilliant. Brilliant.org is a fantastic way to learn all kinds of them smarticle things like sciences and math, like Rocket would say. The way you learn with Brilliant is super intuitive and easy. Their lesson layout and way of engaging with you is super effective and makes learning new things on a daily basis so easy. And this kind of learning has been proven to be 6 times more efficient than the traditional and boring lectures people sit through. Everything you learn in Brilliant, you learn by doing, creating drag and drop coding, forming charts and graphs, and so much more. The way they present everything makes even the most abstract ideas easy to understand and relate to. So at the end of the day, you'll actually understand what you're learning, which isn't that the whole point of learning? You want to be able to practice it. So to try everything Brilliant has to offer free for a full 30 days, visit brilliant.org/filmspeak or click on the link in the description. The first 200 of you will get 20% off Brilliant's annual premium subscription. Again, that's brilliant.org/filmspeak for a free 30-day trial, and thank you so much to Brilliant for sponsoring this video. More so than any of the previous Guardians films, the soundtrack truly guides the narrative in Volume 3. It's almost a jukebox musical. The use of Creep in the opening wonder of Rocket wandering around nowhere is profound. It's one of the best instances of demonstrating isolation, self-loathing, and everything Rocket feels about his existence in one sequence. Even amongst the Guardians, Rocket feels like an outcast, like he doesn't belong, burdened with the trauma of his past, bearing permanent physical scars that serve as daily reminders of the pain of it and the friends he lost. In an interview with Collider, James Gunn had said when talking about Rocket, okay, there's a talking raccoon. If that raccoon existed, how could it really exist? Like, where would it have come from? And I just kind of had this vision of this really horrible past for this little animal that was taken, a little innocent creature, and turned into something he wasn't supposed to be, torn apart and put back together again, and that his life was incredibly painful and he was incredibly alone because there's nothing else like him. And so that idea of Rocket was there from the beginning. And it's not explicitly stated, but you get the sense that in the wake of losing his friends again, due to the events of Infinity War and Endgame, it's taken an added toll on Rocket. He and Nebula were the only survivors of Thanos' snap among the Guardians, and Rocket specifically is grappling with the idea of losing the people he loves again, of not being able to protect them. It's not like they returned in the blink of an eye either. He had to wait 5 years, assuming he wouldn't see them again before defeating Thanos and getting his friends back. That had to have caused him to become numb to connections and friendships, and while I'm sure he was overjoyed to have his found family back, there is this sort of "you've been gone for 5 years, I've moved on" dilemma at play. It causes Rocket to meditate on his own mortality and his past trauma more and more, and then when he's shot and inching closer to death, the past inches closer to the forefront of his mind as he reflects on who he is and his purpose for existing. It's really quite mature existential thinking that might offer the most nuanced look at what the snap and blip did to people that we've gotten thus far. Quill is sort of suffering from a similar pain as Rocket, only the inverse. He was snapped away, and when he came back, the Gamora he knew was gone, replaced with a completely different person. It's honestly so tragic. The idea of the person you love is there, they're physically back, but they have no memory or recollection of the life you've shared together. Even Peter's usual charms and the things that endeared Gamora to him don't mean anything to her because he's a stranger. Gamora is just another person in a long line of people he loved and cared about, taken away from him, and so Peter is an absolute mess. He doesn't know what to do with himself. He turned to alcohol, gets drunk all the time, isn't the leader of the Guardians he once was, and as a result, the Guardians as a unit aren't as cohesive as they once were. Nebula, funnily enough, is really the only one who's willing to kind of take charge, but despite her more level-headedness, if you can really even call it that, she struggles to own up to her mistakes, frequently placing the blame on other people and their ineptitude. During this opening, Nebula's just sort of there, numb to Quill's drunken state for what must be the 100th time. Rocket doesn't even know what to do because of his own shit. He doesn't feel equipped to lead, and so even more so than arguably the first time they all came together, our Guardians are fractured and human. They are not the beacons of justice that, say, Captain America stands to be. They are people who deal with the same things as us, who happen to be thrust into these fantastical adventures. Even the Guardians, who are just trying to make the best of this situation, are struggling to keep everyone else's head above water. They want to support their family, but they're on this never-ending spiral of pain. All of this is exacerbated when Nowhere is attacked by Adam Warlock on the warpath. In this attack, Rocket is shot, Groot is basically decapitated, Kraglin fails, Drax is beaten down, nearly killed, Mantis's powers are ineffective, and Peter is useless because of his drunken state. The Guardians are scrambled, uncoordinated, and ineffective without a leader. They've never looked clumsier than they do during this fight. Everyone is blaming everyone else, and no one is really taking accountability, showing how lost they are without Peter present to lead them in the fight. It's the first hint at why Peter is so important for the rest of the team. They fail without him. Now, that's not to say that Peter's the only person that can lead the Guardians. Peter's got his own problems that he needs to work out as well, but he also brings something out of these characters that they never knew was possible. And this incident pushes Peter to an extreme, as Rocket has a kill switch on his heart that's been activated by being shot in the chest. Again, Peter is faced with the idea of failing someone, of losing someone so close to him. His mom, Yondu, Gamora, and now Rocket have all been a key person in Peter's life, who've helped him see better sides of himself and how he can help others, but he ends up on the verge of being without all of them. All these choices flow through Gunn's fantastic focus on emotion in this script. It's why I love the scenes with Peter once he finally starts to get his shit together. I suppose, you know, we could have spent a little bit more time with him struggling with substance abuse and getting a bit more into his headspace when we first meet him again, but I also don't think it's entirely necessary. Rocket's condition clearly shakes him out of his bender, and it's more than what we got from, say, Tony and his alcoholism from Iron Man 2, so you know what? I'll take it. It's just nice to see these characters as flawed people. Peter keeps trying and placing importance on emotions because that's who he is. He refuses to let what's happened before dictate his actions. His ability to see the best in people, the things they themselves don't see, is what makes him such an effective leader and one the rest of the Guardians respect. It's how Gamora was able to fall in love with him before, even if he has to come to terms with the fact that this Gamora is someone completely different and he can't just manipulate her emotions. The scene where Rocket is all but pronounced dead and his pulse stops, and Gamora tells Quill he's dead and there's nothing more that can be done, and Quill refuses to believe that and leads with emotions and manages to bring him back, even when logic would tell him otherwise. That's the punctuation point on who Peter Quill is as a character. He has to believe in love, even when the odds are stacked against him. He refuses to let his found family die on his watch, which is why his line, "Let's go save our friend," is so powerful. This is a film about love and empathy for others, especially the ones closest to us. It is, at its core, a story about saving a friend, which I find so touching, and the Guardian's journey is beautifully beautifully mirrored by Rocket's flashbacks with his animal friends, misfits finding each other, forming bonds and attachments. It's good to have friends. Rocket tried to save them from being incinerated by the High Evolutionary, only to fail them. And then that failure looms large over him for the rest of his life, contrasting that to what's going on with Peter and the Guardians. But who is the High Evolutionary, you may be asking? Well, he's some RoboCop-looking dude who has created an incredibly intricate god complex for himself. He's not someone like Thanos trying to kill half the universe to save the rest. He's not someone like Ronan just vying for power. The High Evolutionary is in search of perfection. There is no god, and that's why I stepped in. He sees the universe as a broken place, plagued with the disease that is violence and fault. He wants to make the perfect utopia, and Rocket was one of his experiments to get close to finding that utopia. Adam Warlock and the Sovereign were two others, a development that actually makes their involvement in Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2 a lot better. Rocket and Adam are both injured in the same spot, and I believe that signifies the connection between the two. Rocket's mistake led to the premature creation of Adam Warlock, which led to violence being enacted upon the Guardians and Rocket specifically. Adam is Rocket's reckoning for his past mistakes, especially because he was sent by the High Evolutionary, and his refusal to come to terms with the trauma of his past. There is a really interesting commentary going on about creators and their creations. There's a chain of trauma that stems from the High Evolutionary down to the High Priestess and then into Adam Warlock, who's just a child and yet has his mother demanding horrific things from him because she's afraid of what the High Evolutionary will do to her and the rest of the Sovereign. It's a chain of command dictated by fear, obedience, threats, and violence rather than respect, love, and empathy. When you act out of fear, you're acting out of self-preservation with little care for anyone or anything else. The crazy part about all of this is the Sovereign are nothing more than the High Evolutionary's backup plan, and yet this is their whole existence, serving the High Evolutionary and restoring their honor. There's such a really cruel line that the High Evolutionary throws towards the Sovereign, saying that they were nothing more than an aesthetic experiment, basically saying they're just a bunch of useless himbos. At the end of the day, the High Evolutionary doesn't really seem to care, nor does he place much faith in them to complete the mission, especially after Adam Warlock failed. But, you know, let's think about this. The reason Adam failed was because the High Evolutionary awoken him from his cocoon before he was ready. He just sees the Sovereign as a means to an end. If he can get something out of them, cool. If not, he might as well just destroy all of them because that's his right as their creator. The thing is, the High Evolutionary doesn't understand beauty or unity in creation on a base level. In a flashback scene where he's talking to young Rocket, the High Evolutionary is waxing poetic about some piece of music and is trying to make a comparison between the eugenics and music. But music itself is a concoction of imperfections that come together to create something beautiful. The High Evolutionary only sees the finished product, missing the perfection that is birthed out of imperfection. His statement of "be not as you are, be as you should be" is also indicative of an inability to accept people for who they are and see the things that make them great. It's pretty heavily hinted at that this comes from a deep-seated insecurity within himself. He wants to be something more, a god, and he's displeased with himself. He's preying upon the weak and vulnerable, the inadequate, and trying to fix them, make them better, while also stroking his own ego in the process, accelerating them through the millions of years of evolution in a moment. He's accelerating their growth to get to the final result without taking the time to let them grow and evolve on their own. It's sort of what happened with Adam, accelerated growth without mental and emotional maturity, and the High Evolutionary wonders why the creatures are backfiring and becoming violent and aggressive. Well, one, it's because their creator is violent and aggressive. They're a product of the creator who made them. And two, they were never afforded the opportunity to grow into who they are. It's a frightening and disorienting experience. You can't force them to be someone or something they aren't. These things have to happen organically. You can't just have Mantis go to someone and warp their emotions so they get over something. something, because then you're changing the core of who they are as people. You aren't affording them the opportunity to learn and grow. It's the hardships we experience, the trauma and tragedy that allow us to evolve into something more. Being as you are is how you become who you're meant to be. Peter is grappling with failure. Not only does he feel responsible for Thanos winning in Infinity War and losing Gamora, but he also feels as though he's failed his mom, Yondu, and possibly Rocket if he doesn't save him in time. He won't fail Rocket, he says to himself. He can't. He can't stand the thought of being alone, and yet, the day his mom died, he ran away from her bedside, left his grieving grandfather, and was abducted by Yondu shortly after. And so his grandfather not only lost his daughter that day, but his grandson as well. How do you think he felt? Mantis calls Quill on this, pointing out the fact that while he struggles with abandonment issues, he himself abandoned his own family on Earth. He never went back to go check on him after all these years. Perhaps he couldn't face his grandfather in the wake of a tragedy like that, or perhaps he wanted to get as far away as he could from the place haunted by the memory of his deceased mother. He makes excuses like, oh, he's probably dead by now. People on Earth die at what, 50, so what's the point? There's something really interesting about the fact that Quill is so emotional, so empathetic, to the point of discarding logic when it comes to his friends and the things that are right in front of him, and yet he deflects to logic when it comes to confronting the ghosts of his past, the mistakes he may have made long ago. I think that is such an incredibly human reaction. We're so eager to believe, put stock in emotions when we feel like something is in our control, but when we are faced with confronting our own shit, we'll make up 101 excuses just to avoid coming to terms with the past, thinking that we can make things better by pushing on and acting out in a way that will make up for what's happened. We bury our problems deep beneath us. The reality is, addressing the past, embracing it, accepting what's happened, and actually talking about it aloud is how we move past it and how we grow as a person. Peter says, the point is, I wasn't talking about this. Mantis pushes him harder, challenging him with, it's not about what you choose to talk about. It's about the things we don't say, the things we don't want to say, the baggage we carry around with us. That's the stuff we should be talking about. And Mantis understands this more than anyone else because she's an empath. She doesn't read minds, she reads feelings. It's been her purpose her whole life and is why she's visibly affected when someone displays a lack of empathy. I love how Gunn further explores the idea of Mantis being everyone's punching bag introduced in Volume 2. She's just the emotional linchpin of the group. She knows far more about people and emotions than arguably anyone else on the team, but perhaps doesn't have the most common sense, lacks a bit of logic. Many, namely Nebula, sees that as a weakness, someone who's useless, but if you think about the circumstances and environment Mantis grew up in, it makes sense. She's never really experienced the world, she was only acting as a tool for empathy for Ego, serving him and his needs, and then working with the Guardians, serving whatever needs the team required of her. She's largely ignorant, innocent to the way the world works because she's never experienced that, and I think a lot of the team members forget that. Just because she's more of an emotional thinker than a logical thinker doesn't make her any less valuable, and why would you want her to be any different? Gunn uncovers the oft taken for granted value of emotional intelligence and how that's the very thing that makes us human. James is fantastic at exploring the evolution of being yourself through these movies, even within the same character. What I love about Gamora in all of this is how ruthless and violent she is as a result of her being the daughter of Thanos, who hasn't broken away from that mindset just yet. She never rebelled against him, and we're seeing the repercussions of that. Quill is being confronted with the Gamora she was before he met her, before he made an impact on her life. Her whole arc is coming to realize the person Peter really is, see the charm and empathy within him, and what makes him a good person. Through her time with the Guardians, and specifically Peter, this outing, she's able to understand the importance of emotional intelligence and why the other Gamora came to love Peter, and even though she might not feel the same, she gets it. There's a great final exchange between the two where she entertains his wistful remembering of the experiences the old Gamora and Peter had together. I bet we were fun. And Quill acknowledges that they did. That is, it wrecks me every time, even just talking about it, just thinking about it, I'm getting chills and tearing up. It's just, in that moment, Peter is at peace with what's happened between him and Gamora and is finally able to move on. Gamora can as well. She's welcomed into the fold of the Ravengers as they embrace her as one of their own, as a part of their family. That scene, it breaks me. That line breaks me. It's one of my favorite exchanges in all of comic book movies because of the maturity it took for James Gunn to exercise restraint, to be true to the characters and do something that made sense for both of them in order to grow, in order to have these fully realized arcs, instead of resting on the laurels of, oh, we want these two to be back together and so they have to be together, and just doing the cliched thing. No, James doesn't do that. He doesn't take the easy way out, and that's why this movie fucking rules. This human connection, the empathy that each character is diving into, is so important. We show the way that our ability to connect makes us stronger. Rocket, Lila, Teefs, and Floor all want names. They want to be seen as people, as these creatures who have a personality, a soul, a purpose. They want to live a life. They want to take advantage of the gift of existence, not just be experiments. They want to choose something that suits them. It's such a sweet and heartfelt scene that speaks to the simplicity, love, and individuality of their existence. This connection and seeking out of empathy is reflected even in the way the Guardians deflect their fears. Peter has always been a man-child. He's been unable to grow up. It's why he goes around playing space pirate with a mask and a whole outlaw moniker. He's hiding behind a child's escapist fantasy because he's afraid to face the past, afraid to grow up, and that's part of the reason why he thinks so irrationally, for better or worse. The idea that Peter only views himself in the eyes of others has really been an obstacle he's needed to overcome since the beginning. In the first Guardians, we see a bunch of broken, pained, traumatized individuals come together who share and empathize in their loss. They're broken people who become whole when together. They're able to grow to an extent and find family and address the issues that made them the biggest losers in the galaxy. They're able to find themselves within the context of the group, which isn't a bad thing. Sometimes you need other people to help pick you up, guide you, teach you, but at a certain point, you need to do some proper soul searching. You need to discover who you are outside of others. This is something all of the Guardians have to come to terms with, but especially Peter, ever since he grabbed the Infinity Stone during the climax of the first Guardians and Gamora reached out, yelling, and Peter had a flashback to his mom and the biggest regret of his life. He saw himself in Gamora's eyes. He saw an opportunity to make good on what he failed to do with his mother. It healed him in the moment, allowed him to connect with his friends, love, family, but he still wasn't whole. He was masking a problem that was long overdue to confront, and it takes Gamora not being who she used to be for him to realize this. He can't be whoever another person needs him to be. He needs to be himself. So instead of Quill needing Gamora to fill the void of his mom or whoever, instead of jumping from woman to woman in a desperate attempt to find himself, he needs to learn to swim alone, as Mantis puts it. He needs to do some proper introspection and stop neglecting the people he abandoned at a young age in order to discover who he truly is. The beautiful thing about this is that this advice comes directly from Mantis, from his sister. It feels like proper sibling advice, and that's just amazing. Rocket did the same thing in the second Guardians film, retreating into the dickish side of his personality out of the fear of connection, the fear of losing what he has spent so much time building. He was pulled out of that by seeing the darkest sides of himself in Yondu and being able to understand how important family is, to understand how important every person who truly cares about you is. Rocket is this extremely sad, lonely, ostracized little creature, and that's the entire seed for the franchise. The movie is about us as human beings. Rocket started out as this innocent, sweet little guy, and little by little turned into this angry, cranky, violent, mean little creature, and that's all to cover up who he really is and where he really comes from, the fear he had as a shivering little kid. This is the story about why he became that way, and this is also the story about the path home. How do you get back to where you came from as an adult? Rocket feels guilty for letting his friends die. He feels as though he's failed them, but when they come to him, they reassure him that it's okay. The sky is beautiful, and it is forever. And Lila has been flying with friends. He kept his promise, even though he's not quite there to join them just yet. He still has unfinished business in the mortal world, even though he so desperately longs to return to his friends and sees an opportunity to finally be with them in the forever sky. But in doing so, he's also abandoning his new family, the people fighting to keep him alive like Quill. Our Guardians, Peter specifically, refuses to let Rocket go. For both of these characters, Rocket and Peter, instead of allowing the past to dictate their future, they need to come to terms with their past in order to move forward. For Rocket, he has to understand that he still has a purpose. There are the hands that made us, and then the hands that guide the hands. Rocket has an obligation to take the experiences that plagued him and use it to uplift others, to stop running from the past and instead confront it head on in the High Evolutionary in order for him to grow into the next chapter of his life. Rocket's trauma stemmed from being horribly experimented on and then also watching his friends die at the hands of the High Evolutionary. This trauma is reflected as the bomb inserted into his body, the pain he carries with him wherever he goes, the knowledge that it could go off at any moment and destroy him. That trauma has infected his mind for too long, and now he can either succumb to it or rise above it. This film also understands how to show these scars on all its characters. I love how the idea of the most horrific, scary, and repulsive creatures in the galaxy aren't as mean as they appear to be, and how that finds its way into a lot of the film. Mantis is able to see past what's in front of her to what's underneath, their emotions and feelings. When she approaches the Obelisk, as all hope seem lost for Nebula, Drax, and her, she puts forth the notion that maybe they aren't these vicious creatures. Maybe they're just scared. They eat batteries, not people. Mantis is such a profoundly honest character throughout this film and is beautifully employed by Gunn. Not only do we understand her more as a person throughout the film, but she helps us understand those around her. She speaks the truth, the things we try to cover up or aren't interested in learning from someone that seems a given way on the outside. She stares down aggression with empathy. She looks beyond the mask, beyond the faces we put on to see the pain we may be feeling underneath. And while they're freeing everyone, it gives Rocket a chance to fully accept who he has always been. Rocket returns to free his kind, to finish his mission and ensure what happened to him never happens to anyone else, least not his own kind. He does this using the key he made and used to escape all those years ago, the key he carried with him since that moment. He's got them, all of them. In doing so, and in conquering his abuser, he's finally able to embrace who he is, Rocket Raccoon. The High Evolutionary is just a man hiding behind a mask.
He didn't want to make things perfect. He just hated things the way they are.
After all that, Rocket spares him, gives him a second chance, even though he definitely doesn't deserve it in the eyes of many. But that's not who he is anymore. He's done killing and taking. He finally finds the strength within to grow and mature into a hero, into a
frickin' Guardians of the Galaxy. Only he didn't use freaking.
In the climax of the film, as the High Evolutionary's ship is being destroyed, Quill risks his life and almost died so that he could retrieve the Zune and pass it on to Rocket. He refused to let the music, the words, emotions, the art form die on that ship. He understood how it helped him cope all those years and helped inspire him. He needed to share that with the people who needed it and gave it to Rocket as a means to keep the song going. Share the parts of yourself that make you happy. Through all their traumas, they rise above. Adam is broken and confused, but is able to find a new family with the Guardians. He's in the position the Guardians were in the first film, lost, in need of direction, people who can empathize with his struggle and who can guide him to a place where he can then take over when the time comes. He's the next generation of Guardians, and the current Guardians are able to finally accept where they are in their lives, understand their trauma, and instead of running from it, they start facing it head on. Peter's been running ever since his mom died at 8 and needs to return home as an adult and reunite with the people he left behind all those years ago. All of the Guardians are able to finally figure out their shit. Drax no longer is seen as the destroyer. Throughout the film, it is really brought home that he is the hearts of the Guardians. His undying need to protect and be a guiding force for these kids they rescued is his next great adventure. He finally gets to be the parent Thanos robbed him of being all those years ago. He gets a second chance. Nebula is able to give back to people who were almost forced into the life she had. She can make a difference and becomes the leader of the new city of Nowhere, a safe haven for everyone to live their best lives and have the life she never had. Mantis leaves the group because she needs to go experience life, what she wants. She serves Ego and then the Guardians without really giving herself time to grow. Rocket is able to finally become the great Guardian he was always meant to be. As Peter once said,
he says that he's an a-hole, but he's not, and I'm quoting him here, 100% a dick.
Take his trauma and reshape it to help others. James Gunn is even able to give us the same catharsis as the Guardians, as for the first time, we understand Groot. He doesn't just coincidentally know how to speak a new language, no. We are let in on the team. We understand him. Groot says, "I love you guys." We are finally able to see every element of these people, understand every element of their lives, understand what they're saying, even when they might not be saying it, and see them blossom into the versions of themselves they had buried deep down. There's a particular moment that I think sums up the entire thrust of what makes Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3 so powerful, and which simultaneously reaffirms why this trilogy matters, because they are rooted in pieces of James Gunn's life, and he is very frankly putting them out there. There is an incredible meta exchange between Peter and a secretary at the OrgoCorp HQ, who's refusing to let Peter into the system to help them escape. Gamora calls the security in their way corporate shills, and Peter says they will listen if I speak to them from my heart. It's a sentimental line that echoes how James approached his initial firing from Disney. He genuinely tried to plead, to explain, to speak from the heart. Now, I never doubted James's sincerity, and I want to make that clear, because Quill in the film pulls the rug out and says, "I'm not an idiot, I just needed to get into the system," before using it to hack the security guard's suits and escape. James, on the other hand, stated his case and said his piece in a heartfelt way, letting the cards fall however they may, and rising to the task of finishing his trilogy after Disney rightly decided to bring him back on board. And with that opportunity, he made a fucking masterwork. Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3 is a film made with the energy of not only someone who is sure they're making their last film in a series, it's made by someone who knows firsthand what it was like to lose this and has absolutely not taken it for granted once he got it back. He took every opportunity afforded to him, used all the carte blanche he had to make his movie and stick it to the system that screwed him. This scene exemplifies the mean-spirited Gunn we had come to originally know in the likes of Slither. But at least, I hope anyway, the movie isn't just a fuck you to Disney. It's an opportunity for the larger machine to understand the value of emotional intelligence, instead of making knee-jerk reactions to lessen the blowback of some nothing controversy that had already been put to bed and addressed years prior. And in making the right decision, Disney ensured that one of the great movie trilogies that we've had in many years got the capstone finale it deserved. The final needle drop of the film, of the entire trilogy, Dog Days Are Over, perfectly captures the bittersweet feeling of the Guardians of the Galaxy going their separate ways. It's been a hell of a run. We hate that it's come to an end, but we're happy that they all got to go on this journey. It's just such a beautiful way to close out this thing. Peter returns home to see his grandfather is still alive, overjoyed to be reunited with his grandson. Gamora returns to the Ravengers and is embraced by them, loved and welcomed home into the fold. She truly feels as though she's found her people. And after all this time, Drax finally gives in and dances, his spirit lifted and filled with love and joy. It's the most perfect ending for these misfits who've endured so much shit throughout their lives, so much pain, suffering, and heartbreak. They deserve this moment. They deserve to all make it out happy and with a second shot at life. I think in turn that the boldest but rightest decision James Gunn made with this film was to not kill any of these characters. It would have been easy to give the grand finale stakes with a sacrifice, but it would have been cliche. Instead, James constructed stakes and real emotional tension primarily with Rocket, but as the story progresses, with each of the Guardians to make us feel as though any of them could die at any moment. But this ain't the Suicide Squad. They're all getting out of this one. They're getting their happy ending. He leads with what's the most appropriate ending for the character, not how can I manipulate an audience's emotions or how can I subvert their expectations. James once stated that the worst thing for him is to see something on screen and not believe it, to see it coming a mile away or have a resolution feel forced or unearned. It's the mistake of many screenwriting novices. Forget what people expect, what people assume has to happen because this is the third film in a trilogy. Forget what's come before. Focus on right now. Focus on the characters and the emotions right in front of you and do what feels right. Create with emotion, create from your gut, and most of all, create a story that your film can tell in isolation while still being compelling. Yes, the Guardians films are a trilogy. Yes, the events of Infinity War and Endgame have a certain bearing on Volume 3, but you can watch any of these three films on their own and have a complete, cathartic 3-act experience that matters. All it does by watching the related films is make the emotional bond that much stronger. Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3 is truly the affirmation of James Gunn as a storyteller and all of the things he believes in and feels as a human being. It's why the film works so goddamn well and is unlike any other MCU film that's come before. It's, to a large degree, why this is my new favorite entry in the entire MCU. It's why the Guardians of the Galaxy trilogy transcends the confines of the MCU. It's not only the best trilogy of films within that cinematic universe, it's not just one of the greatest comic book movie trilogies of all time. No, it joins the ranks as one of the greatest movie trilogies of all time. And we owe all of that to the genius of James Gunn.